Have you ever caught yourself standing alone in your kitchen, muttering out loud about something that happened 3 hours ago, and then suddenly stopped, looked around, and felt a strange flash of embarrassment? Even though nobody was there to hear you? That pause, that little jolt of self-consciousness. It's strange when you think about it. You weren't hurting anyone. You weren't even aware you were doing it until you caught yourself. So why did it feel like you'd been caught doing something wrong? Here's what's interesting. Talking to yourself isn't a glitch in your mind. It isn't a sign that something is off. In fact, it might be one of the clearest windows into how your brain actually works. And almost nobody realizes what's really happening when it does. Most people assume silence is normal, and talking out loud to an empty room is the exception. But if you actually study human behavior closely, you find something almost the opposite is true. The mind is never actually quiet. It's constantly narrating, evaluating, rehearsing, warning, comforting. What changes is only whether that narration escapes into sound or stays locked inside your skull. Think about it. When you're deep in thought, solving a problem, planning your day, replaying an argument you wish had gone differently, your brain is essentially having a conversation. Two parts of you, trading thoughts back and forth. Most of the time, this conversation stays silent, running as what psychologists call inner speech. But under certain conditions, especially when your focus narrows, when stress rises, when a task becomes difficult, or when you're alone and your guard drops, that internal dialogue slips past the filter and becomes audible. And here's the part that surprises people. The moment it becomes audible, something changes in your brain. It's not the same as thinking. Speaking a thought out loud recruits different neural pathways than simply thinking it. Your motor cortex activates. Your auditory system lights up, because now you're not just producing language, you're hearing it, almost as if someone else said it. In a very real sense, when you talk to yourself, you briefly become both the speaker and the listener. You're outsourcing a piece of your own mind back to yourself. That's only part of the story, though. Because if talking to yourself was just about processing thoughts, we'd expect it to happen randomly, evenly, without any pattern. But it doesn't. Research suggests self-talk spikes dramatically during specific situations, searching for a lost object, trying to complete a difficult task, preparing for something stressful, like a presentation or a hard conversation, comforting yourself after a mistake. Notice what those situations have in common. They all involve uncertainty. They all involve your brain trying to organize information under pressure. And this is where it gets fascinating, because self-talk isn't just a byproduct of thinking hard. Some psychologists believe it actually helps you think hard. It's not noise around the thought. It's a tool that shapes the thought. Imagine you're looking for your keys before you're late for work. If you silently think, "Where are my keys?" the search can feel scattered, your eyes darting everywhere at once. But the moment you say it out loud, "Okay, where did I put my keys?" something shifts. Your attention narrows. Your search becomes more deliberate. Several studies indicate that verbalizing a goal, even quietly under your breath, improves focus and task performance, especially when the task requires visual searching or step-by-step execution. Saying the words seems to sharpen the mental image of what you're doing, almost like drawing a spotlight around your intention. This is where it starts feeling personal, isn't it? Because you've probably done this without ever thinking about why. Muttering instructions to yourself while cooking, whispering directions while packing, saying "just breathe" under your breath before something nerve-wracking. It never felt like a strategy. It felt automatic. But that's exactly the point. Your brain developed this habit because it works, and it works so quietly in the background that you never noticed you were using a tool at all. But here's what nobody talks about. Not all self-talk serves the same purpose. There's a difference between self-talk that guides you and self-talk that judges you. And this difference might explain a lot more about your inner life than you'd expect. Think about the two very different tones people use when they talk to themselves. Sometimes it's instructional. Okay, next step is calm, functional, almost like a coach walking you through a task. But other times, it turns into something sharper. Why did I say that? That was so stupid. Why can't I ever get this right? Same behavior, talking out loud to yourself, but a completely different emotional signature underneath it. Psychologists have found that the way you talk to yourself, especially the pronouns you use, can actually change how well you handle stress. This might sound almost too simple to be true, but research suggests that people who refer to themselves in the second or third person during stressful self-talk, saying something like, "You can handle this," instead of "I can handle this," tend to experience less anxiety and perform better under pressure. It creates just enough psychological distance to think more clearly, almost like briefly stepping outside yourself to offer advice, rather than being trapped inside the panic. Now here's the strange part. This tiny linguistic shift works because of how your brain processes self-referential language. When you say I, you're fully inside the emotional experience. Your amygdala more reactive, your threat response more engaged. But when you say you, even though you're still talking to yourself, your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for calm reasoning and planning, gets a little more room to operate. In other words, the words you use when nobody's listening might be quietly shaping how well you cope with the world. Have you noticed how differently you talk to yourself depending on your mood? When things are going well, self-talk tends to be light, almost playful. A quiet nice after finishing something. A little there we go when something finally clicks into place. But when you're anxious, exhausted, or overwhelmed, self-talk often turns critical, repetitive, even cruel. The same inner voice that once cheered you on quietly can become the loudest source of self-doubt you own. This is where it starts to feel less like a personality quirk and more like an emotional mirror. Because your self-talk isn't random. It often reflects the voices you absorbed growing up. If you were raised around encouragement, your internal narrator likely leans supportive. If you grew up around criticism, perfectionism, or constant correction, your self-talk may have inherited that same tone, even decades later, even if the original voice is long gone from your life. In many ways, when you talk to yourself, you're replaying an old recording, one built from years of feedback you received before you even had the ability to question it. That's a strange thought, isn't it? That the voice in your head commenting on your every move might not be entirely yours. It might be an echo, but it gets even stranger. Because talking to yourself isn't only about processing tasks or managing emotion. It also plays a role in something deeper, something tied to identity itself. Think about the moments when self-talk becomes most intense. Often, it's during transitions, starting a new job, ending a relationship, standing at a crossroads, unsure which direction to take. In these moments, people talk to themselves more, not less, almost as if the mind is trying to stabilize a shifting sense of self by narrating it out loud. Some psychologists believe this happens because identity itself is partly constructed through language. We don't just have experiences. We tell ourselves stories about those experiences, and self-talk is often where that storytelling happens in real time. Imagine going through something difficult and catching yourself saying, almost involuntarily, "You're going to be okay." That sentence isn't just comfort. It's identity reinforcement. It's your mind reminding you who you are, what you're capable of, what kind of person survives this. In that instant, self-talk becomes less about managing a task and more about holding yourself together. And this brings us to something most people never consider. Loneliness and self-talk are more connected than they seem. Some psychologists suggest that self-talk can increase during periods of isolation, almost as if the mind, deprived of external conversation, starts generating its own. It's not a sign of losing touch with reality. If anything, it might be evidence of the opposite, a mind actively working to stay socially and emotionally regulated, even without another person present. Here's what's fascinating about that. Humans evolved as intensely social creatures. Our brains developed language largely as a tool for connection, for coordination, for bonding within groups. When real conversation isn't available, self-talk may be the brain's improvised substitute, a way of simulating social interaction using the very same neural machinery built for talking to others. In a sense, when you talk to yourself, you're not abandoning connection. You're recreating it internally, using yourself as both companion and audience. That reframes everything, doesn't it? The habit that once felt slightly embarrassing, the moment you caught yourself mid-sentence in an empty room, might actually be one of the most human things you do. Not a flaw, not a strange tic, but evidence of a mind that never stops trying to think clearly, feel steady, and stay connected, even when no one else is around to listen. So the next time you hear yourself thinking out loud, correcting yourself under your breath, narrating your own morning as you make coffee, maybe don't rush to feel self-conscious about it. That voice is doing more work than you realize. It's organizing your attention. It's regulating your emotions. It's holding pieces of your identity together during moments you don't even notice are fragile. And maybe the real question isn't why you talk to yourself. Maybe it's what that voice reveals about who's really listening. Because if the way you speak to yourself shapes how you handle stress, how you see your own identity, and how connected you feel even in solitude, then there's another question waiting right behind this one. What happens when that inner voice turns against you? Why do some people's internal narrators sound like a friend, while others carry a critic they can never quite silence? That's where the story goes next, into the psychology of the inner critic, and why some minds seem so much harder to live inside than others.